There. Good. Just find that rhythm. Control, yeah. Nice. Keep those lats and abs engaged. Up and away, knees straight. There you go. Much better. Much better. 2 more. And rest. Today I want to talk about the reverse hyperextension. This guy over here, it's more than just a standing desk table. It's been popularized obviously by Louis Simmons, legendary powerlifter, Westside Barbell. You've seen all the videos. So a lot of times people don't really know how to explain the benefits or even how to use it. That's why not a lot of places have this machine, because it takes up some space, as well as a lot of people don't know how to use it, and the ones that think they do are not really sure on what its effects are. So it's hard to explain, to teach others, because there's a learning curve in how to use it in the first place. So I've had this for a few years right now in my practice in my garage gym, and what I find, it could be very powerful, highly effective piece of equipment once you understand and qualify it for the right individual. But just in general, not just for rehabbing low back injuries or issues, but it teaches one how to engage certain parts of their bodies that they normally wouldn't. In this case, as they say, triple extension, but it's really double extension in that I use it to help people engage their hip extensors and their shoulder extensors. A lot of times, a typical patterning is somebody uses their extension patterning where they extend more from their spinal extensors, mainly the lumbar extensors. And this is a holding pattern of sorts that they use to help gain control and stability in their body. And they tend to, all movement begins and ends from that patterning, okay? So the problem with that situation, it limits their ability to move out of extension, and it de-emphasizes other aspects of that extensor chain. In this case, what I just mentioned, hip extensors and shoulder extensors. This is why some people swear by the reverse hyperextension machine for their back. They've used it and they've never felt better, and it rehabbed, it cured them from all their issues in their back. Other people, which is about, I see 50%, the other people, it made me worse or didn't do a thing for my back issues, right? So this is where you got to really individualize and understand where a person's etiology or cause of their symptoms in the first place before using something like this. And this is why not a lot of people use it. They don't understand it. And then if you research some of the videos on social media or YouTube on how to use this, let's be honest. Pink elephant in the room is that people are just imitating, repeating word for word, verbatim, the old videos from 20 years ago of Louis Simmons going over his version, his interpretation of what he thinks is going on, that they do the pattern, in the same pattern, they copy what he did in his old videos, full extension, full flexion, full extension, full flexion. And then what Louis Simmons tends to describe, and what everybody keeps on repeating and imitating what he says without understanding what is actually going on, is that extension and that flexion, that repeated patterning, is creating somewhat of a distraction compression. It's a pumping, and it's helping with the healing of the disc, and it's creating that distraction at the end, and then it compresses and decompresses. So that pumping action creates a healing situation, and that's what Louis, he got benefit from it, and that's what he built his whole brand, so to speak, creating that machine. So anyway, research, hasn't been a lot of research studies on it. I think there's like one popular study that a handful of intelligent clinicians have posted on their YouTube sites, that I believe there was a handful of study participants, maybe, I don't know, less than 20, 19 or so. So it's a very, very small study. But what they found was that at the top, it creates a lot of what they call posterior shearing in the lumbar spine, which just basically means a lot of extensive stress in the lumbar spine. So that alone, it's not appropriate for certain cases of extension intolerant individuals that have pain when they go in extension. And at the bottom, under load, because the pendulum of the weight is pulling you down into more flexion. If it's greater flexion than a person has available to them, it can create a little bit of a flexor load and overstress their lumbar discs, for whatever that means. Now, nobody really knows what's going on. That's my point. Okay, so what I'm sharing with you is mostly just from clinical experience, anecdotal. There's no research yet, but maybe this will help stimulate or stir some of that research. So what I generally do for people is, because we tend to, a lot of people tend to use their spinal extensors as their go-to patterning or holding pattern, and then they have that tight back situation, and when they need to forward bend or flex, it's very difficult for them. They feel stiff. So one of the ways to help unload that, yes, you could train your abdominals to unload the back. That's one aspect. What I find, teaching their nervous system how to extend from other areas other than the back, mainly hip extensors and shoulder extensors. So when I always start people off on this, just their body weight, no resistance, just resistance of their legs. Getting on the table and having them extend through their hips, it's basically doing an open chain RDL, okay? Kind of the same thing, but big difference in the neurologic profile in that instead of their feet being grounded to the floor as in the closed kinetic chain, it's their hands that are actually being grounded through the handles, right? So I'm not saying that anybody's wrong with their theory or hypothesis of what's going on, possibly going on when they do the exercise, when they feel a benefit. But let's say, for example, Louis Simmons, what he describes as this compression, distraction, pressure distraction, and that's helping the disc and the fluids get back into this, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I'm not a researcher. I'm not Stu McGill. But my take, my hypothesis is that maybe they got results because they're so used to using their spinal extensors, and that's why they have their issues, that's where their pain is, their symptoms, etc. But when you put them in this situation, this position, it's relatively unloaded, but then their hip extensors on the down position are in a more stretched position. And then it goes through a fuller range of motion in which they have to produce force to lift the legs up. So mainly it's creating an awareness of those hip extensor muscles that they normally wouldn't get when they're squatting or when they're deadlifting, okay? So that greater awareness is a novelty of the brain. So the nervous system thrives on novelty. So maybe that offsets some of the force, some of the load that they normally put in their lower back to those hip extensors, which allows for the healing of whatever involves soft tissue structures in the lower back they're having symptoms from, okay? Now the way I teach it is, that's hip extension, but that's just half the exercise. The other half of the exercise is shoulder extension. You forget you could extend your arms back here. We tend to have our arms in front of us and we forget that we can reach back like this, okay? So this is evident when you see somebody walk and they don't have a lot of arm swing. They're just kind of like this, okay? They lose that capacity to extend over here. Guess what extends our arms? Our latissimus dorsi, the largest muscle, most superficial muscle we have on our back. A lot of potential to do a lot of great things as far as function. So when you hold on to the handles in front of you, most people, they hold on and their elbows are flared out like this. They're using their pecs, they're using their delts, and they're compressing their shoulder joints and they're holding on. And that's all they're doing, so they don't fall off the table. But the way I teach it is I have them pull in using their pinky and ring fingers on the handles, and pull their elbows in, okay? And then pull towards them so they engage their lats, as well as using the pad that they're leaning against to engage their abdominals to get what I call the rib fold patterning or positioning, okay? That's gonna take some pressure off of the back, but you have to understand superficially the lats, its influence on the lower back is to create somewhat of an extension force in the lower back, okay? So we're engaging the abdominals to counter that, because there's already a lot of extension going on in the spine in general from the deeper spinal extensor muscles. So the lat muscles are more superficial by the thoracodorsal fascia, so to speak, where they insert onto, and where it has an influence on the pelvis to want to rotate forward. So we're going to counter that with the abdominal obliques over here in the front. And then, but we still want the effects of the lats on the rest of the spine, in the mid and upper back, okay? So you're going to pull that there. So you're going to emphasize more of extending through your upper back, rather than your lower back, right? So that's going to engage the shoulder extensors from above, and then the actual movement of the reverse hyper is for the hip extensors, okay? So then I have them lift the legs up to the point only so they can feel their hamstrings and or their glutes as part of their hip extensors to engage, not so much their lower back. You're going to see a little movement in the lower back, but that's going to be countered because the lats are doing the work and the abdominals are stabilizing so that the spinal extensors don't have a reason. So when we start loading them up, whether it be with weight plates or I like to use bands because that extends the force curve to create more work towards the end range of hip extension. So with regular weight plates, what happens is I have them find a rhythm, okay? Because it's a pendulum motion, because whenever you think pendulum, you want to think rhythm. It's a matter of going up and controlling going down. So they find their rhythm where they're learning how to create that force to lift the legs up without involving the lower back as much, or work from the lower back, mostly from the hip extensors, and then to essentially control it. Now, I don't really need them to have their legs go forward underneath them greater than 90 degrees, because then that creates too much flexion forces that they have to counter. Some people may not have the flexibility in their hip extensors to get those legs forward, so I don't think it's necessary. So I have them go just about vertical, or what's 90 degrees or perpendicular to the floor, their legs perpendicular to the floor, where they control it down, and from that point they eccentrically load, stimulate the stretch receptors of those hip extensors, and then they contract, shorten, and load it, okay? This way, and it's not a matter of, Louis Simmons says about, I think it's 50% of your max squat or whatever it is, high repetition. That's fine and great. I don't think that's necessary early on, because we're teaching patterns. We're teaching new movement patterns a person's not used to, muscles they've had all their lives, but not using them sequentially in the manner that they need to, because it's use it or lose it. They've been successful using that extensor pattern, mostly getting it from their spinal extensors, not so much from the hip extensors and nonetheless the shoulder extensors. That whole synergy could work together as a team rather than just isolating one area. So that helps with the longevity of the soft tissues. That's what we're really seeking, not just to prevent injuries, but we're trying to maximize the output and the ability to recover from our efforts and training. So when you do it this way with the weight, you're also just finding rhythm, okay? And that's where Louis Simmons, I think, what he tapped into, that, but he went into full flexion, full extension, full flexion. I don't think it's necessary for most cases to get the same effects, all right? So now, when you start stimulating those hip extensors with this machine, don't think more as of hypertrophy or strength. Think more of coordination, of neurological efficiency, of a patterning to balance or complement what you're already using, okay? So I generally have people start off just their body weight, then I progress them to the pendulum loaded, and then I progress them also with the bands to get a certain more overload on the end range, okay? But you start to really see, everybody's different when they do this. A lot of compensations start to reveal themselves that you could make a change on the fly as a result thereof when you start loading. So loading reveals all compensations, let's say, right? And it's a great piece of equipment that you can actually get a lot of value out of from the little instruction that you actually need. I haven't seen any videos out there on YouTube or on social media that is putting out this perspective, so hopefully this will help as far as at least stir up some new thoughts or novelty on how to use this. But I can just say, based on my experience clinically, it's a very powerful machine when you're used in this manner. I like to start people on just the body weight reverse hyperextension before I load them up with weight. So what you're going to do is, it's all in the setup of the upper body that makes the lower body. So you're going to hold on to the handles, whole hand hold on to the grips, but emphasize squeezing more of the pinky and ring fingers, and think of pulling your elbows in as you pull them back. You want to engage your lat muscles because they're shoulder extensors. So hold the handles, pinky and ring fingers. I pull elbows in towards each other. I have my lats engaged. I have my right and left pelvic bones pressing on the edge of the table, of the bench. I pull my rib fold muscles, the abdominals, to counter the lower back. Legs straight, toes pointed to get the whole extension chain in the leg. And then I'm gonna lift my legs up and away so I feel my hamstrings and some of my glutes, not my lower back. So if I go any higher, than here for me, like this, that's my lower back. I don't want that. So up here and then down, okay? Obviously I wouldn't be looking to the side because I'm looking at the camera. I would look straight ahead like this. And this is without weight. I'll have them do, keeping the knee straight. I have people do generally between 10 to 20 repetitions just with their legs, because I want to train them the pattern of hip extension first. Oftentimes what you'll see are people do this. They'll bend their knees because they don't have the strength of their upper hamstrings. So they use the hamstrings, the lower aspect that attach to the knee, to compensate. But the idea is not so much hip extension as we're doing shoulder extension, engaging those lats to provide the stability in the shoulder girdle and in the trunk, so that the lower back spinal extensor muscles don't have to do the work as much as they're used to. So we're de-emphasizing them, and we're emphasizing the extensors from the hips with some help from the extensors of the shoulder. Finally got the camera. Okay, here's Coach James. He's just doing his body weight reverse hyperextension. Now, previous to this video, he was feeling it. He wasn't able to engage his lats pulling on the handles, so he would feel it in his upper shoulder neck area. And that's because he was grabbing, if you notice, he's grabbing more with his pinky and ring fingers, and he's driving his elbows in so he can get those lats more engaged rather than his scapular elevators, which he was feeling before. Now, he's only bringing body weight because he's raising his legs up to the point that he feels it in his glutes and his hamstrings, not his lower back. His lower back is being countered, 1, by the lats, 2, by the abdomen. We're doing body weight first so he can connect the motion, the patterning, and then we're gonna load it up to the strap to actually do the reverse hyper with the sheet, okay? That's the way we do things in a Johnson Garage Gym. Just go through a few reps again. Okay, James here, what we found with weight, a little bit of weight, he tends to bend his knees, and when I cue him to straighten out his knees, he doesn't know how to use his upper hamstrings, where the hamstrings insert into the pelvis. He only knows how to use his hamstrings where they insert into the knee. So when he does try to keep the knee straight, his brain doesn't know what the hell to do to extend from the hips, so it extends through the back. So he's a back extensor, not a hip extensor.